He hadn't slept in 11 days. Not drowsy, not drifting in and out. Awake, completely, clinically, irreversibly awake. His body was exhausted in a way that has no word in any language. His mind was still running, burning through reserves that should have been gone days ago. And yet, no matter how dark the room, no matter how quiet the house, no matter how desperately, every cell in his body begged, sleep would not come. It was not coming tomorrow, or the day after, or ever again, because the part of Silvano's brain that was supposed to let him rest was already dead, not metaphorically, not slowly failing, dead, eaten alive from the inside by something he had inherited from his father, something his father had inherited from his, something that had moved through the bloodline of this quiet Venetian family. 4 generations, silent, patient, perfectly invisible, waiting, just waiting. And in 1983, in a bathroom in Venice, at 52 years old, Silvano looked in the mirror and knew, with the certainty of a man who has spent his entire adult life studying his own inheritance, that it was coming for him next. What he did with that knowledge is one of the most extraordinary acts in the history of medical science. And what his disease did to him is one of the most terrifying things a human body can do to itself. Stay with me, because this story doesn't just belong to Silvano. It belongs to every person who has ever lain awake in the dark and thought, even for one fleeting second, what if I never fall asleep again? It belongs to you. And by the end of this video, you will understand something about sleep, about the brain, about inheritance, about what it means to be human in a body you didn't choose, that most people go their entire lives without ever knowing. If you're new to this channel, we tell real medical stories here, true cases, real people, the stories that exist at the edge of what medicine can explain and what it cannot. Subscribe before this video ends. You're going to want to come back. To understand what happened to Silvano, you need to understand where he came from. Venice, Italy, a city built on water, on beauty, on centuries of quiet, aristocratic history. Silvano came from a family that had lived there 4 generations, educated, cultured, the kind of family that kept records, letters, diaries, medical documents, which is how, by the time Silvano was an adult, the family already knew their secret. The secret had a pattern. It always began in the middle of life, never in childhood, never in old age, always somewhere between the early 40s and the mid-50s. It began with sleep, or rather, with the end of it. A family member would stop sleeping, not gradually, the way insomnia usually works. The creeping, fitful, restless kind that responds to treatment, to routine, to rest. This was different. This was sudden, like a switch being thrown. One night, sleep. The next, nothing. And then the other things would come. The sweating, profuse, unexplained, soaking the sheets even in winter. The pupils shrinking to near nothing in daylight. The inability to regulate temperature. Blood pressure swinging wildly, without warning or pattern. And then the most disturbing thing of all, the waking dreams. Not sleep, not real sleep, but something that arrived in the gap, where sleep used to be, a kind of enacted dreaming, the body moving through dream scenarios, while the eyes stayed open, while the person was, in every observable way, completely awake, acting out, gesturing, speaking, living inside experiences that existed only in a brain that had lost the ability to stop. Silvano had watched this happen to his father. He had sat with him, held his hand, watched a man who had been sharp and present and fully alive begin to dissolve, not in his sleep, but into the terrible country between sleep and waking, where there is no rest, only the relentless grinding of a machine. that cannot be switched off. His father had died, as every afflicted member of the family had died, within months of the first sleepless night. And now, in 1983, standing at his bathroom mirror in Venice, Silvano felt it begin. He described it to his doctors with a precision that came from years of watching and waiting and knowing. He said, it starts with something in the sleep, not the absence of it yet, not the full darkness of what was coming, just a change, a quality to the nights that hadn't been there before, a restlessness, a new and specific wakefulness at 3 a.m. that felt different from any wakefulness he had known, like something had shifted in the architecture of his nights, like a door had opened somewhere in his brain that was not supposed to be open, and through that door, something cold was beginning to move. I want to stop here for a moment, because I need you to understand what Silvano did next. He didn't go home and wait to die. He went to the doctors, and he brought them everything: the family records, the letters, the documented deaths, the pattern he had spent his adult life watching and mapping and preparing for. He said, this is what is going to happen to me. He said, I want you to watch every moment of it. He said, when I am gone, study what I leave behind. Because Silvano understood something that most of us, sitting safe in our ordinary lives, never have to understand, that sometimes the most meaningful thing a person can do with a death is make sure it teaches something to the living. He donated himself, his waking hours, his declining hours, his brain before he died and after. He gave medicine a window into a disease it had no name for yet. He gave science the only thing it could not manufacture for itself, a willing witness. And what science found, looking through that window, would change our understanding of the brain, of sleep, of disease, and of what it means to inherit something from the people who made you. Let's talk about what fatal familial insomnia actually is, because the name tells you what it does, but it doesn't tell you what it is, or how something this devastating can live invisibly in a family for generations, arriving on schedule, killing on schedule, and leaving nothing that any doctor before the 1980s could identify or name. FFI is a prion disease, and if you've never encountered that word before, prion, I want you to hold it carefully, because it describes something that challenges almost everything we think we know about how disease works. A prion is not a virus. It is not a bacteria. It is not a parasite or a toxin, or anything that comes from outside the body. A prion is a protein, specifically a normal protein that your brain already makes, that every human brain makes, that has existed in our cells since the beginning of our species. It's called PRP, the prion protein, and in its normal form, it does its job quietly, invisibly, without incident. But in Silvano's family, in every member of that Venetian bloodline who carried the mutation, a single error in the genetic code changed the shape of that protein, not its chemistry, not its composition, its shape. And shape, in the world of proteins, is everything. A misfolded prion protein is biologically infectious to other proteins, not through contact, not through air or blood, through proximity. A misfolded prion sitting next to a normal prion causes the normal prion to misfold too. And then there are two, and then four, and then a cascade, slow, silent, unstoppable, of misfolded proteins accumulating in the brain tissue, like rust forming on metal, until the damage is visible, until it has eaten holes, literal physical holes, in specific structures of the brain. In Silvano's case, in every FFI case, the damage targets one place above all others, a small, almond-shaped structure buried deep in the center of the brain, the thalamus. The thalamus is your brain's relay station. the switchboard through which almost all sensory information passes, on its way to conscious awareness. But it does something else, something that becomes devastatingly apparent only when it is gone. The thalamus regulates sleep. It is the structure responsible for initiating and maintaining the cycles of rest your body needs to survive. When it is damaged, when prion disease has eaten through it, the way termites eat through wood, leaving it honeycomb hollow, sleep becomes impossible. Not difficult, not disrupted. Impossible. The switch is broken. The door is closed. And nothing, no drug, no intervention, no amount of human exhaustion can override what the thalamus can no longer do. This is what was happening inside Silvano's brain from a moment of that bathroom mirror morning to the last day of his life. The thalamus was dying and taking sleep with it. I need to pause here because if you're watching this and thinking, this is so rare, this could never be me, I want to offer you something that is both reassuring and deeply unsettling. In equal measure, you're right that FFI is extraordinarily rare. Fewer than 60 families worldwide are known to carry the mutation. But prion disease, the mechanism, the misfolded protein, the cascade of neurological damage, is not limited to FFI. Alzheimer's disease involves protein misfolding. Parkinson's disease involves protein misfolding. As Huntington's, CTE, the same fundamental mechanism that destroyed Silvano's thalamus, operates in different proteins at different speeds in diseases that affect millions of people around the world right now. Silvano's story is extreme, but it is not separate from yours. It is an intensified, accelerated, mercilessly compressed version of processes that live in the biology of every human brain, which is exactly why what his doctors found matters so far beyond a single Venetian family. Drop a comment below right now. Had you heard of fatal familial insomnia before this video? And has this story changed the way you think about something as ordinary as a night's sleep? I read every comment. And stay with me, because what comes next is the part that no medical textbook has ever been able to fully explain. Silvano's decline followed the pattern the family knew, the pattern medicine was only beginning to document. Stage 1 lasted approximately 4 months. The sleep fragmented, then disappeared almost entirely. The sweating began. The pupils contracted. Silvano moved through his days in a state of profound, unrelenting wakefulness that no human nervous system was designed to sustain. And yet, and this is what made Silvano's case so remarkable to the doctors watching, he remained himself, lucid, present, engaged. He spoke to his doctors clearly. He described his symptoms with the precision of a man who had been preparing this testimony for 30 years. He understood what was happening. He understood what was coming. And he chose every single day to keep talking, to keep contributing, to give medicine everything it asked of him, while he still had the capacity to give. The doctors who worked with Silvano in those early months have described it in interviews conducted years later as one of the most humbling experiences of their professional lives. To sit across from a man who is watching his own death approach, who knows its timetable, knows its stages, knows there is no exit, and to watch that man use what remains of his waking hours, not in despair, but in service. Stage 2 arrived around month 5. The hallucinations began, not frightening ones initially, not the horror film imagery that the word conjures. Something stranger than that. Silvano began to enact dreams. While fully awake, eyes open, sitting upright in a hospital bed, he would move through scenarios that existed only in the space where sleep used to be. He would reach for things that weren't there, speak to people who weren't in the room, perform actions, cooking, working, walking, with the focused intentionality of someone who believed completely in the reality of what they were doing. His brain, deprived of the sleep in which dreams are supposed to occur, was generating them in waking hours instead. The boundary between sleep and consciousness, the boundary the thalamus is responsible for maintaining, had dissolved, and what poured through the gap was every dream Silvano's brain had been unable to process. Months of them, a flood of unprocessed imagery, an emotion and narrative, erupting into the waking world. Because there was nowhere else to go, the doctors watched, documented, measured, and Silvano, in the moments of clarity that still visited him between episodes, spoke about what it felt like from the inside. He said it was not frightening. He said the dreams felt real in the way that only dreams can, with a completeness, a sensory fullness, that the waking world sometimes lacks. He said the hardest part was not the dreaming. The hardest part was returning, coming back to the room, the hospital, the doctors, the body that would not rest, the knowledge of what was coming next. The hardest part was waking up into a life that had no sleep in it anymore. Stage 3 lasted only weeks. By this point, Silvano could no longer communicate with the clarity he had maintained through the first half of his illness. The dementia that accompanies late-stage FFI had begun to take the edges of him. The precise, careful man who had walked into those doctors' offices with 30 years of family records under his arm, who had said, "Watch me, learn from me, make my death mean something," was fading, not gone, not entirely, but fading the way a voice fades, when the person speaking it is moving away from you. Through a closing door, you can still hear the tone, the rhythm of how they speak, but the words are becoming harder to catch. He died in 1984, 18 months after that bathroom mirror morning, exactly as the pattern had predicted. He was 53 years old. He left behind a wife, children, the most comprehensively documented case of a disease that medicine was only just beginning to name, and something else, something that would take another decade to fully understand. His brain, preserved, donated, waiting for science to develop the tools to read what it contained. The doctor who received that brain, who spent years studying it, who would eventually help name the disease and trace the mutation through the family, was an Italian neurologist named Elio Lugarici. What Lugarici found changed the field of sleep medicine and prion biology simultaneously. The thalamus, as predicted, was devastated, riddled with the sponge-like holes. The technical term is spongiform degeneration, that are the fingerprint of prion disease. But what Lugarici also found was the mechanism, the proof that a misfolded protein, inherited, genetic, present since birth, could lie completely dormant, 4 or 5 decades, and then activate, could wait, could be patient in a way that no other disease is patient. And this raised a question that haunts the surviving members of Silvano's family to this day. The question that 40 years of research has still not answered. Why does it wait? The mutation is present at birth. It is detectable through genetic testing. The protein is there in the brain from the earliest days of life, and yet it causes no damage, no symptoms, no sign. For 40 years, sometimes 50, it simply waits, and then one day, at an age and a moment that science cannot yet predict with precision, something triggers it. Something flips the switch that turns a dormant mutation into an active catastrophe. What is that something? We don't know. And that answer, those 3 words sitting in the center of decades of research, are the most honest and the most frightening thing I will say in this entire video. We don't know. There is a man alive today. We will call him by the name the media has used, DT, to protect his privacy, who tested positive for the FFI mutation. He knows what is coming. He knows the timetable. Somewhere in his future, on a night he cannot predict, he will stop sleeping, and he will have months. DT has spent years working with researchers, funding studies, participating in clinical trials, designed to find something, a drug, a therapy, an intervention that might slow or stop what his grandfather's grandfather started in the DNA of his family. As of the time of this recording, there is no cure for FFI. There is no treatment proven to extend survival. There is no way to unfold what has been misfolded. But there is research, work happening right now, in laboratories in Bologna, in San Francisco, in Tokyo and London and Nairobi, that is targeting prion proteins, the shape of them, the cascade of them, the biological dominoes that Silvano's death first made visible. Some of that work is focused on FFI specifically. More of it, because of the connection between prion mechanisms and the broader landscape of neurodegenerative disease, is focused on Alzheimer's, on Parkinson's, on ALS, on the diseases that, unlike FFI, do not spare most of us. Silvano's willingness to be studied, his extraordinary, deliberate, conscious choice to give his decline and his death to science, is not just part of the history of FFI. It is part of the history of every disease that involves a misfolded protein in a human brain, which is to say, it may be part of your future, or your parents' future, or your child's, and you deserve to know that. Before I tell you the last part of this story, I want to ask you something. If you knew, if you had the option of a genetic test, that would tell you, with certainty, that you carried a mutation, like the one in Silvano's family. Not a risk, not a probability, a certainty. Would you want to know? Leave your answer in the comments. I am genuinely asking, because this is a question that geneticists and bioethicists have debated for 40 years, and there is no consensus. Some members of Silvano's family have been tested. Some have chosen not to be. Both choices are rational. Both choices are human. And both choices illuminate something about what it means to live with knowledge that cannot be undone. Share this video with someone who you think would sit with that question seriously. This is the kind of conversation most people never have until a diagnosis forces them to. You don't have to wait for that. There is a researcher at the University of Bologna, Pierluigi Gambetti, who has spent decades studying the brain tissue Silvano donated. In the years after Silvano's death, Gambetti and his colleagues identified the precise genetic mutation responsible for FFI. It sits on codon 178 of the PRNP gene, a single point mutation, one letter changed, in the four-letter alphabet of DNA, a substitution so small it would be invisible to the naked eye if you could hold the genome in your hands. And yet from that substitution, from that single misplaced letter, everything flows. The sleeplessness, the hallucinations, the dementia, the death, from one wrong letter. Gambetti's team also discovered something else, that the mutation at codon 178 produces different diseases, depending on a second variable, a polymorphism at a different position, on the same gene, a slight variation that determines not whether the disease occurs, but what form it takes. In some families, FFI. In others, a different prion disease, called Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. Same mutation, different outcome, based on a single additional variable in the same gene. The biology of this, the way two almost identical genetic errors produce such different devastations, is one of the things that makes prion disease so extraordinary. to the scientists who study it, and so terrifying to the families who carry it. Silvano's family, the extended bloodline, has been tracked, studied, and supported by researchers in Bologna for 4 decades now. Some members carry the mutation, some do not. Those who carry it live their lives, knowing what their mirrors may one day show them. Those who don't carry it live with the particular complexity of having been spared, something their siblings were not. The survivor's guilt of genetic lottery. What has emerged from 4 decades of following this family and a handful of other families worldwide known to carry FFI mutations is something both sobering and remarkable. Sobering because we still cannot stop it. Remarkable because we understand it now in extraordinary molecular detail. We know the gene. We know the protein. We know the structure of the misfolded prion. We know what it does to the thalamus. We know the stages. We know the timetable within a range. What we don't yet know is how to intervene. But here is what researchers believe, and why the work continues with such urgency. Prion proteins can be targeted. There are experimental compounds in early clinical trials right now designed to reduce the expression of the normal prion protein, the one that gets misfolded, in people who carry known mutations. The theory, if there is less normal protein available to misfold, the cascade slows or stops. These trials include participants from FFI families, including potentially DT, who knew his diagnosis and chose to fight. We're not there yet, but we are closer than we were when Silvano looked in that bathroom mirror and understood what was coming, with no hope of stopping it. Here is what I want you to take from Silvano's story. Not fear. I know the fear is there. I felt it writing this. You probably felt it watching it. That is the correct response to something this terrifying. But underneath the fear, underneath the prion and the thalamus, and the genetic code, there is something else this story is about. It is about what a human being does, with knowledge they cannot unknow. Silvano knew what was coming. He had known since he was young enough to understand what his father's death meant, and he chose, not in some dramatic moment, not with speeches or heroics. He chose quietly, in a doctor's office in Venice, to do something with it, to say, if this is what I have, let it be useful. Let my dying teach the living something they could not learn any other way. That choice, that quiet, deliberate, dignified choice, is why we know what we know about FFI. It is why the researchers in Bologna have the data they have. It is why DT has trials to participate in. It is why the experimental compounds exist. Because one man, in one city, in 1983, decided that his death will be the most generous thing he ever did. There is no cure, but there is research, and the research exists because Silvano made it possible. Think about that. The next time you close your eyes at night, the next time sleep comes easily, the way it comes for most of us, quietly, reliably, without drama or effort. Think about the man in Venice, who felt it leave him, who lay in the dark, and felt the most ordinary thing in the world become the one thing he could never have again, and who chose, even then, to give everything he had left to a future he would never see. That is a human being. That is what we are capable of. And that is why stories like Silvano's deserve to be told and heard and carried forward into the ordinary miracle of a good night's sleep. Good night. Sleep well. If this story moved you, if Silvano's life and his choice left something in you that wasn't there before you press play, share this video. Not for this channel, for Silvano, for the researchers in Bologna who have spent their careers trying to honor what he gave them, for DT and every person in every family who carries a mutation they didn't choose and lives with knowledge they cannot put down. Their stories deserve to be known. Subscribe if you want to keep hearing them, because there are more. There are always more, and I will be here to tell them. I'll see you in the next one. This story is based on documented real medical cases. Some scenes and dialogue have been dramatized for narrative purposes. All medical and scientific information is sourced from peer-reviewed literature.